We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 23rd of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, finance ministers gather in Washington for the IMF spring meeting.
These trade tensions will greatly impact global trade. We project that global trade growth will be more than cut in half.
We'll look at how Asia's finance ministers are jostling for attention from the US to try to protect themselves from Donald Trump's tariffs. Also coming up,
we are beneficial now of the fact that there is a war because we are selling weapons. This is the very simple equation. But tomorrow the war will finish. We will not sell weapons. So somebody believes that there will be no need of security? I don't think so.
We hear from Italy's defence manufacturer Leonardo about the need for Europe to maintain its investments. Plus the newspapers and why Gen Z is being given lessons in how to answer the phone. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said he won't attend a set of Ukraine peace talks in London after the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country won't give up Crimea as part of any ceasefire agreement with Russia. The Trump administration has said it plans a radical overhaul of the US State Department, saying it's become beholden to radical political ideology. And official Israeli messages of condolence following the death of Pope Francis have been deleted shortly after being posted online. Well, stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the queue of finance ministers eager to plead their case to the US is getting longer. Near the top must be those from East and Southeast Asia, some of which have been threatened with the prospect of particularly steep tariffs. Well, this week, many of these ministers are in Washington as part of the IMF's spring meeting. But yesterday, the International Monetary Fund said US tariffs will cause significant global economic slowdown and says the country that will be hit the hardest is the US itself. So what does everybody else do? Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Edward Howell, who's lecturer in politics at Christ Church, Oxford, and author of North Korea and the Global Nuclear Order. A very good morning to you, Edward. Good to have you with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's very good to be here.
So did the IMF's warning yesterday come as a surprise, especially to those nations who believed that they were heading to Washington with the United States holding all the cards?
I think that one of the things that countries such as South Korea have tried to do in the run-up and the prelude to this meeting is to work out what the South Korean acting president, Han Duck-soo, has called a win-win solution with respect to questions of cost sharing, but also with respect to trying to minimize the impact of Trump's sweeping tariffs. I think more broadly, for many countries, particularly US allies in Northeast Asia, such as South Korea and Japan, this is not just a question of how to deal with tariffs. And even though this is obviously likely to dominate these meetings in this week, this is also about alliances more broadly, particularly given the Trump administration's transactional approach to alliances, which is very much something of which these countries will be wary.
Indeed, and in that context and in this atmosphere, what do we mean by alliance now?
Well, this is an interesting question because we know that South Korea has a trade surplus with the United States. This surplus has actually risen and it reached a peak of over $55 billion last year. The US has supplanted China as South Korea's largest export destination last year. So here we're seeing South Korea try and work out a compromise. It's actually expressed a willingness to try and discuss reducing this surplus, such as by buying US liquefied natural gas or commercial airliners. And we've also seen attempts at cooperation between South Korea and the US in terms of naval shipbuilding. I think on the part of South Korea is increasingly aware that for the United States, the main competitor is China. This is all about the US China economic and political competition on the part of the Trump administration at the moment.
Let's bring in Megan Morris, who's Singapore Deputy Bureau Chief at Business Insider. Very good afternoon to you, Megan. I mean, just listening to what Edward was saying there, it's all about compromise, workarounds. But when you get a message from the IMF yesterday saying that there will be significant global economic slowdown and that the hardest hit of them all is the United States, if you were a finance minister from Seoul or from, let's say, from Vietnam or indeed from Japan or indeed Singapore, what would your strategy be this morning?
I would hope to have excellent advisors, because I don't know that I on my own could come up with the exact way to strike the incredibly delicate balance that these ministers are working with. As Korea tries to work out what we just talked about as a win-win solution, they're not just balancing the U.S. and Korea's interests. You also have China looming large, with Beijing being very clear that anyone who seeks a deal that could hurt their relationship with Beijing but help their relationship with the U.S. could be in hot water with Beijing. So I would do my very best in my messaging to show that every deal that we are trying to strike is one that has multiple beneficiaries. But in these times, that is a very, very challenging task.
Because staying with you, Megan, each country needs to address its trade surplus in order to be more attractive to the United States, doesn't it?
Yes, and each country is now going to have to take probably hits of billions of dollars in correcting what the U.S. sees as a trade imbalance, even if other countries do not see it that way. These countries now are also going to be on the hook for the short-term responsibility of propping up industries as they sort this all out. Korea has talked about pouring $23 billion in kind of stimulus and relief funds to help its manufacturers and other groups. So there's a lot on the line here with a lot of interest to balance. It's one of the trickiest stances that I think these trade ministers have engaged in possibly their careers.
Edward, bringing you back in here, let's focus on one country which is in a particularly tricky spot, which is Vietnam, because it is often seen, or it is considered, it's very closely tied to China, isn't it, with Chinese exports. And Vietnam has been threatened with hugely high import taxes, tariffs by the United States. And if it pivots too much to the United States, that will displease Beijing. If it pivots too closely back towards China, that will displease Washington.
Indeed, and it's interesting how only days after Vietnam hosted the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, the Vietnamese Prime Minister actually said that Vietnam has what he called a unique bond with the United States. I think this really epitomizes the dilemmas faced by many of these countries, the hedging they might have to play between Beijing and Washington, and also the balance between politics and economics. We know that for Trump, the Trump administration has made clear that it views all of these things as one sort of package. But for many countries, military and political relationships with the US, Japan and South Korea being the two most obvious examples here, are also contradicted, one might say, by strong economic ties with China. And this is something that will lead to many countries in North and Southeast Asia, Vietnam as an example of a country in Southeast Asia, really trying to work out how best to balance their ties with Washington and with Beijing in an era that looks to be increasingly defined by great power politics.
Megan, let's look at temporarily about what's happening this week in the markets where you are. With the IMF sending out such a stark warning yesterday and warning about growth slowing globally for the next year or so, how have the markets reacted in this afternoon where you are?
We are seeing a divergence here in global markets, what analysts are calling the sell America trade. We are seeing bad news, big picture in the U.S., although yesterday stocks ticked upwards. Here in Asia, though, things have been a little bit more settled. So we're seeing green shoots, which is a very encouraging sign that investors are possibly starting to price in this volatility, although every day brings a new set of headlines out of the U.S. So for now, things are looking okay. But I think investors are really sitting on the sidelines here and trying to digest not only the trade talks, but also earnings. We have a good chunk of large multinational corporations reporting in the next 2 weeks. So there is a lot up in the air right now that could spook or pacify investors depending on the day and the hour.
Megan Morris and Edward Howell, thank you both so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist. It's 8:10 a.m. in Rome, which is where we head next, because Europe's decision to rearm and the EU's role in Ukraine is proving a tricky business for Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Her recent good-natured meeting with Donald Trump in the White House has proved her vital as in her role as transatlanticist. But it's a headache back at home, where the atmosphere is very much of one of the EU realising it needs to go it alone. Well, this is crucial for Italy's largest defence company, Leonardo, a company which has enjoyed a big boost in profits recently and has also been forging ahead with strategic partnerships such as with Germany's Rheinmetall for tank production and Turkey's Baykar for drones. Well, Roberto Cingolani is the CEO of Leonardo, and he recently sat down with our Europe editor-at-large Ed Stocker at Leonardo's Rome HQ to talk security, thinking European, and Donald Trump.
I think now the point is to be committed, because there's huge global challenge in the defense, and personally I believe defense will soon become an old concept, because we have to shift from defense to global security, and global security means changing completely the technology approach that we have. So in this respect, I've been a scientist most of my life. I do see a fantastic opportunity to develop new technologies to make our society safer. Of course, the geopolitical context is demanding, because we need to give the feeling to our citizens that security is guaranteed. And this is not actually the case now, so we have to work hard. The company is doing well because, first of all, there was an increase in the business, obviously, but also because we had a massive injection of new technologies, starting with digitalization, but not only. And I believe that this idea to develop an integrated strategy for multi-domain interoperability, that means all our platforms, land, sea, air, space, should communicate to each other, should be connected in a cybersecure way, supervised by satellites, and decisions should be made by very fast computing capabilities, analyzing data that are collected in real time. So what we call AI, but it's much more complex than AI itself. I believe this is the way we should develop security in the future, and that's why we're all committed in developing this program.
I mean, that's a lot, though, this fully integrated system, and that involves moving into new areas, including space. How far away do you think is that fully integrated reality?
The case of Leonardo is very special. A point of weakness of the company in the past has been to develop massive hardware platforms, so aircraft, helicopters, components for ships, land defense systems, electronics. And when you make hardware rather than software, the margins are low. You need long-term investments. It's very difficult to develop new hardware. So that was a drawback for the company. Now it became a plus. Primarily because if you have the capability to build all platforms in all domains, including satellites and space applications, then the next step is to glue them, to join them by cybersecurity and, of course, advanced communication that have to be cybersecure. And then you need to develop cloud capability, high-performance computing capability to have a decision-making process which is AI-driven. So the most difficult part, actually, was to have the platforms. And this we already have in our DNA. So now implementing the rest, so the space part, the AI part, the digital part, it's, maybe I should not say easier, but definitely more favorable than starting from scratch building hardware platforms. How far we are, I think in this decade we'll see a lot of progress.
How ambitious is Leonardo?
The point of view that I have is that no one can make it on its own. I was very clear with the investors when I introduced last year the industrial plan. So, on one hand, Leonardo has a very strong position because, as I said before, we do all the hardware, we develop all the AI, we develop cybersecurity, we're now investing in space. So, we have most of the components of the puzzle. However, in order to be self-sufficient, you should be gigantic. I mean, look at the competitors in US. They are 60, 100 billions or so. We are 20 billions. In Europe, the size of the big defense companies is slightly smaller than in US. So I don't think the right choice is aiming at being totally self-sufficient, aiming at being the one company show. On the contrary, we have to make alliances. We have to create European giants that exploits the synergy among different defense companies. Means giving up for something in your domestic market, replacing this with some portion of the global market. So we have to do our best to grow on one hand, but on the other hand, we have to do our best to create alliances. What we did with Rheinmetall, we did with for the GCAP, and with Baykar for the drones. That's an effort. We should abandon the idea of the national defense in favor of a continental defense, and as such, we should be competitive to the other continents. So the fractional market that we can target is by far bigger than what we have in our individual member states. I mean, of course, this requires fair play, a reasonable approach, technical analysis done in a serious way, somehow no domestic approach to the discussion, but just thinking in a continental way. I like to think European. I don't like to think Italian.
You've said in the past, fairly recently, that you don't think it's the US's role to protect Europe. Have you been pleased with the reaction from the European Union and other countries, including the UK, who are looking to up defence spending and essentially rearm?
I've been living in the United States and I've been working there. I have a brother working there. I like US, and I believe that this is not US against Europe. Let's be very clear. The American taxpayer said, we don't want to pay our taxes to defend Europe for problems that Europe has at its border. And this is reasonable, no? On the other hand...
Trump said that, or the taxpayers said that?
No, I think this is a common sense of the taxpayer in the US, okay? I would say in the sock of the taxpayer, and I would say, why do we pay so much money to defend another continent? On the other hand, of course, Mr. Trump said this in a very colorful way, but I believe this is a reasonable argument without any ideology behind, okay? Just common sense. Again, in common sense in Europe, they say, okay, we're the second investor in global defense, very likely, as a procurement. But in the end of the day, most of our money, again, of the taxpayer, is going to buy American platforms. So I think the reason is just in the middle. We should invest more. So if we invest more, we should have more European products. So we have to create wealth in Europe. And the reason is not to compete the competition between US and Europe. That would be a stupid thing. The reason is that under the NATO umbrella, you need two legs. And the two legs have to be comparable, because we have to be more reliable and stronger partner in the NATO alliance to defend our security. And this is an interest for us, but also for the Americans, to have a stronger NATO, which is defending actually the Western way of life. So if you consider this in a very constructive way, it could be win-win.
It's also a slightly strange situation for you, perhaps, in a way, because global instability, Russia, China, wars also are good for business, for Leonardo.
You see, this is the simplest approach to the business of defense, to my opinion. And everybody, by common sense, is saying the same.
But it's not, you can't deny you profit from global insecurity.
Of course, because we are in defense. This is pretty much like during the COVID, people were making profit by the antibacterial and the antivirus masks. And this is unfortunately life. However, I like to see slightly longer term. Right now there is a peak. But let me tell you frankly, if tomorrow all the conflicts in the planet will shut down, there is 59 conflicts at the moment. So the question is, tomorrow we all hope Ukraine war to finish. So what do you think? That the investors will not invest anymore in defense? So for me, the investment in defense will be reduced, but the investment in security must grow. In the future, you will see security will include energy security, food security, infrastructure security. There will be always need of security. And I think we should stop thinking that we invest in weapons. We invest in security. I'm ready to stop producing war aircraft if finally the governments will understand that security goes through energy security, cyber security, and so on and so forth. The point is, we have to intercept the technology needs that every era, every period of our history needs. This is what defense and security must do. We are beneficial now of the fact that there is a war because we are selling weapons. This is the very simple equation. But tomorrow the war will finish. We will not sell weapons. So somebody believes that there will be no need of security? I don't think so.
That was Roberto Cingolani speaking to Monocle's Ed Stocker. For more on Leonardo, look out for Ed's report on its Sardinia-based international flight training school in the May issue of Monocle magazine on newsstands tomorrow. You're listening to The Globalist, still to come.
Hello, Emma. I'm Julia Lassica, and I'll be covering the news from Central and Eastern Europe, including why Japan is looking to share intelligence with Ukraine gathered from its satellite constellations.
Stay with us.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's just nudging 7:20 here in London. Let's have a look at the newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Paul Waldy, Europe correspondent at the Globe and Mail. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning.
You were sitting down and I said, how are you? You went, busy.
Very.
What's happening?
So much is going on these days. You know, we've got a big election in Canada coming up on Monday. We've got the whole tariff situation. We've got, the Pope and the funeral and who's going to attend and who the next Pope is going to be. So there's just so much going on. It's a busy, busy time.
Well, we are grateful that you spared a moment to come in and tell us how to look at the papers. You mentioned the Canadian election. That's next Monday. How's your paper covering it?
Well, I mean, it's a huge election. It's a kind of a fascinating election in many respects. And one of the areas that I've been particularly interested in is Quebec. Of course, it's a big province, holds an awful lot of seats, 78 seats. And historically, or in the last few years anyway, the Liberals have kind of run neck and neck with the Bloc Québécois, which is a nationalist party, only runs candidates in Quebec. Last election, they came out about even, 34, 33 seats each. This time, the Bloc had been hoping to make some big breakthroughs. They'd been doing very well in the polls leading up to this election. But Mark Carney becoming leader of the Liberal Party has changed everything. I mean, even though his French is labored, to say the least, and he's made a few gaffes when he's campaigned in Quebec, he seems to have just reinvigorated the Liberal fortunes in the province. They're now far ahead of the Bloc. They're likely to win by far the most seats in the province. And it's largely down to the fact that I think Quebecers are really, more than many Canadians, afraid of Trump and afraid of this talk of annexing Canada because, there goes the French language and French culture if it becomes part of the U.S.
There is an interesting relationship that Quebec has with the rest of the country, doesn't it?
Fractious.
Yes. And suddenly to find everybody united is a rather gorgeous thing.
Well, it's strange, too, because the Liberal Party historically has been the party of federalism, the party of Pierre Trudeau, the party that many Quebecers hate for years and would never vote Liberal in their lifetimes. And here they are now, apparently, by the looks of the polls anyway, switching from the Bloc, which wants Quebec sovereignty, to the Liberals, which are the most hardcore federalist party in the country. And it's a fascinating, with a leader who doesn't speak French very well. So it's a really strange circumstance.
Yeah, let's touch briefly on Carney's French. It's okay, isn't it?
It's okay, but if you're a Quebecer and of course they had a French language debate last week, and the other leader's French is much, much better than Carney, and that was evident. And of course, Jean-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, is obviously bilingual and speaks French perfectly. So when up against him, Carney looks pretty bad. So
and he
yes,
still
his French.
To pull it off.
He managed to pull it. Well, he got through the French language debate. Let's put it that way. But he has managed to pull off the election very well in Quebec and is far ahead right now.
We shall look forward to seeing what happens on Monday. Thank you for that. The Washington Post, actually lots and lots of papers are covering the fact that Elon Musk says that he's going to step back from his involvement with Doge, with his connections with the US presidency, to focus on Tesla. Now, one wonders whether this is which reason is the biggest one? The fact that Tesla's earnings have absolutely plunged since he stepped into bed with the Trump administration. But also, are we now looking at Trump and Musk falling out already?
Well, perhaps, but I think it's more along the lines of Musk's connection to Trump has really impacted Tesla. There's been a backlash, as everybody's seen, not only in North America, but around the world, in terms of people, deciding they're not going to buy Teslas, not only not buying Teslas, but burning them, vandalism, these kinds of things. And I think that's really affected the bottom line. We saw the results yesterday, first quarter results, profit down 70%, sales down 13%, no real new new vehicle on the horizon, Cybertruck kind of going nowhere, and Musk acknowledging that he has to spend a lot more time on Tesla and less time with the Trump administration. And I think that's what Tesla investors want to see. Share price has been halved in the last 6 months or so. And so I think this has just been a fallout from his connection to Trump and the fact that the backlash is really taking hold.
Looking at it from the European perspective, I know that you've seen, you were in Ukraine not so long ago, and you noticed that people weren't buying Teslas much. I mean, how people have the time to buy a Tesla when they're being attacked by Russia is one thing. But the idea that actually across Europe, the European sales of Tesla have really taken a hit, haven't they?
They have taken a hit. And what's interesting in Ukraine is electric cars are really, really popular because fuel's so expensive. And because of the war, the supply of fuel has been interrupted. But electricity has been okay. So people have been buying electric cars. And they had been buying Tesla like crazy. It was the most popular brand. That's fallen back. Now, of course, what you're seeing as well, amid all of this, not only is there a backlash against Tesla, but Chinese electric vehicle sales are going through the roof. I think BYD, the China electric car, is now the most popular electric car worldwide. So that's impacting Tesla. Of course, other big car companies are also getting into the electric vehicle market. So Tesla's facing challenges on all fronts, not just in Europe, but worldwide.
Let's move on to a story in the New York Times. The head of 60 Minutes, CBS's flagship discussion head-to-head program, has stepped back, citing pressure from the US government. This is huge.
It is, and it's kind of frightening, and it's kind of telling about where journalism is at in the US right now. This is Bill Owens. He's been executive producer of CBS, I think, for about 6 years, but he's been with the network for a very long time. And he resigned yesterday in kind of a tearful address to employees, suggesting that really he's never faced so much pressure from the top, so much interference from CBS executives and the owners as well of CBS, Paramount. Real interference in the editorial production of the show, what kind of stories they cover, how they cover them. And a lot of this is tied to Trump, who's really gone after CBS. He's suing CBS. He's walked out of an interview with CBS. And there's overlaying all of this is a proposed deal between Paramount and another company, a sale. And of course, Paramount's major shareholder, Sherry Redstone, really wants to settle this lawsuit with Trump. She wants this deal to go ahead. She wants Trump's blessing for this deal. And there's a real suggestion here that is kind of impacting how CBS operates, and in particular, how 60 Minutes operates.
Indeed, he was saying that he was incredibly unhappy about the additional layers of oversight that CBS executives have placed on the programme. Editorial independence is something that is absolutely to be held dear and treasured, isn't it?
Well, it is, and particularly at CBS with 60 Minutes, which has been around for so long and had so much independence.
Let's finally move on to a wonderful story about William Shakespeare.
Yeah, I mean, this is about his wife, Anne Hathaway, who for the longest time, we know very little about Anne Hathaway, but the feeling among a lot of historians has been that their relationship, their marriage, was not a happy one, that she spent all of her time in Stratford while he built his career in London. But now there's new evidence from a professor at the University of Bristol. He's uncovered a snippet of a letter that was sent to Anne Hathaway, and it involves a kid named John Butts, who Shakespeare had agreed to kind of support financially. And the letter is asking Mrs. Shakespeare to pay a debt that William Shakespeare owed this kid, and it addresses her in an address in London, which suggests that they did live in London together, and that she was much more involved in the finances than people thought. And there's even a handwriting on the back of this letter that might be in her handwriting, which would be the first we've ever heard from her.
Requiring some phenomenal amounts of rewriting.
And it's his birthday today. It's Shakespeare's birthday today, so there you go.
It is as well. Paul Waldie, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The time here in London is 7:28. Let's have a look at the headlines. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said he won't attend a set of Ukraine peace talks in London after the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country won't give up Crimea as part of any ceasefire agreement with Russia. Mr. Rubio took part in a meeting on Ukraine last week in Paris, but afterwards warned that Mr. Trump was growing impatient with the peacemaking process and might move on to other priorities. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has said it plans a radical overhaul of the US State Department, saying it's become beholden to radical political ideology. They include the office which deals with the US response to war crimes, as well as those concerning refugees and migration. And official Israeli messages of condolence following the death of Pope Francis have been deleted shortly after being posted online. The Israeli account on X briefly showed a picture of Pope Francis praying in Jerusalem, but there were fears of a backlash from certain sectors of society who saw Pope Francis as anti-Israeli. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look at some of the stories we're following here at Midori House. Here's Monocle's Gunnar Gronlid on why the Arctic archipelago Svalbard has become a tourism and geopolitical hotspot.
The coolcation trend sweeping the Nordics has reached as far as the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard. Last year, 67,000 cruise passengers visited Longyearbyen, the island's capital. Overnight stays in the town have more than doubled since 2010. Svalbard's infrastructure and delicate ecosystem are not the only things that are creaking under the pressure. The Svalbard Treaty of 1920, which granted Norway sovereignty over the archipelago, also gave signatory countries relatively free rein to conduct commercial and research activities there. Two signatories, Russia and China, have been testing the limits as tensions rise between the two nations and NATO in the Arctic region. Recent provocations include Russia falsely accusing Norway of militarizing the archipelago, while reports suggest that China is planning to use its Svalbard-based polar research stations for defense purposes. Before things get out of control, Norway needs a plan to avoid inundation by both tourists and hostile global powers.
And that was Gunnar Gronlid. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Now, in 2015, the British journalist and author Tim Marshall did the almost unthinkable. He made geopolitics accessible to all with his book Prisoners of Geography. Since then, it's sold 3 million copies worldwide, has been translated into 40 languages and has engendered spin-offs such as children's books and even a quiz. Well, now Tim has written a brand new version of the book to reflect 10 years of dramatic change on the geopolitical stage. Monocle's Hassan Anderson sat down with Tim and began by asking him why some of the challenges were in updating a book with such a rapidly changing subject matter.
Firstly, just understanding where we are. And I think that it's pretty clear that the post-Cold War era has ended and we're in a new era now. You can call it the era of hard power. I'm sure there'll be a name for it. But the second challenge is then, because things are moving at such pace, how to get those all in. When I did the recording for the audiobook, I was actually ad-libbing, reading off the screen, and then I'm ad-libbing stuff. That's how fast-paced it is. But that doesn't change the big picture stuff. The stage is mostly the same, and the underlying rationale that geography partially dictates what happens is still there.
One of the goals of your original book was to emphasise the geo in geopolitics, as you put it. And you write that although geography isn't the determining factor, it is the most overlooked. Do you think 10 years later that is still the case?
I think less so, because geopolitics, which had a pretty dirty name, actually, as little as 10 years ago, people have actually realised that the geo in geopolitics is to do with geography, that it is not... It doesn't have to be entirely deterministic, and just because it was misused by some extremists in the previous century, it doesn't mean that it's not a thing. One of the things that's happened over the past decade is even more important it is where the minerals are, for example, where the lithium is and where the copper is. So it is still the case that geography is central to what happens. It's just that sometimes, as we go through the decades, which bits of geography become less or more important. So where the coal is, not so important. Where the lithium and the copper is, very important. And so I've added in things like the Lobito corridor, which connects Angola and the ports of Angola through to the Democratic Republic of Congo and the copper belt in that part of Central Africa, because it's become much more important. The other one would be the lithium triangle in Latin America. And then you've got the high north, which is increasingly coming into focus for NATO and the Russians. The Northern Sea route across the top of Russia is opening up more every year. And as we mentioned, Greenland. And you suddenly realize, why is Greenland important? Because of where it is and because of what's in it.
So it kind of gives us a rationale behind the seemingly mad and unpredictable whims of someone like Donald Trump, who's vying for Greenland.
When Trump comes along, in his own belligerent and unpleasant manner, I hasten to add, and says he wants to buy or control Greenland, it's not a surprise, nor is it mad. Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, is closer to America than it is to Copenhagen. And the minerals and rare earths that are there is part of their geography, part of Greenland's geography. That's why he wants it. The geography of Greenland is high in his mind when his defense people tell him the quickest route to the United States for both ballistic missiles going over and submarines coming under is Greenland. And so it is strategically important to them. And, and geography is front and center in that. I mean, so is technology and so are ideas, but geography underpins that.
Is there not another sense, though, in which the leadership that chooses to respond in certain ways to these geographies is just as consequential, and that there's a risk of de-emphasising the politics and geopolitics here?
Yeah, I mean, you've raised a really good point, because there are various theories of history that leaders don't matter is one of them, which I disagree with. Other one, geography is overrated, which I disagree with, because I think they're all important and you have to follow all of them and see how they mesh together. Now, clearly, in this example, the leadership of the United States is really, really important, but it is linked to geography and bigger underlying trends. The pivot to Asia by the Americans really began under Obama. But it's become more focused and more accelerated by the personality of Trump. He and the MAGA high priests, the ideologues, and indeed the strategists, and they do have them. I'm not arguing that they're right or wrong. I don't know yet. I'm not arguing that I like or dislike what they're doing, because it's irrelevant if I like or dislike it. What I'm arguing is that it is thought out. So they have taken that Silicon Valley idea of move fast and break things. But despite knowing that, and despite knowing the tariffs were coming in, etc., I am surprised at the speed of which they have moved. For example, I thought they would focus more on Europe and the Middle East and only turn to China later this year. But in fact, they've pretty much, in their phrase, flooded the zone on everything. So it has come faster than I thought. Iran, which I think is coming down the track pretty fast now. Again, that's something I thought that would, because of the bandwidth of diplomacy and economics and politics is only so wide, and yet they seem to be going at everything. And again, I'll go back to this idea that not that they don't know what they're doing, they do. Again, I emphasize I don't know if it's going to work or not. But they have come to the conclusion, they came to the conclusion before they came to power that this was a new era, and the era of hard power, as I call it, and that they are going to break things and remake the new era, or make the new era, to the way they want it. And so they have dived in and battered the Europeans very quickly because they don't care anymore. That's what's one of the hallmarks of the new era. They don't care.
That was Tim Marshall talking to Monocle's Hassan Anderson, and the 10-year anniversary edition of Prisoners of Geography is out now. You're listening to The Globalist. It is, 9:38 in Kyiv and 8:38 a.m. in Zurich. Let's hear now from Julia Lassica, Monocle's writer and researcher, joining me here now for the Central Eastern European news update with a focus, I would say, on Ukraine.
Yes, good morning, Emma.
Very good morning to you. Good to have you with us. Let us begin with the news that's broken in the last few hours that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is not coming to London to talk Ukraine. He was in Paris last week for the Ukrainian talks there, but at the end of last week, he said, or rather the Trump administration said, that the time was ticking in the amount of patience it had left with this conflict.
And that was such a sinister sort of phrase, wasn't it? Because it wasn't clear who they were losing patience with. Was it the Russian side, who are the ones dragging their feet, unable to accept a full ceasefire, unable to stop firing on civilian targets in Ukraine, even when they have themselves, Putin declared his Easter ceasefire? Or is it the Ukrainian side, who have so far made progress with the Americans on signing the minerals deal? They have committed to a ceasefire on the sea and in the air. So it's unclear. So yes, Rubio will not be in London today. Neither will Steve Witkoff, who is travelling to Moscow this week to talk again to the Russian side, to Putin. But Keith Kellogg, our favourite sort of representative from the Americans, who loves to come up with lots of phrases but then doesn't really have much to back it up, unfortunately. He will be in London today, so it is a watered-down American side.
This role of occupied by Kellogg seems almost ceremonial, doesn't it? Because what he says doesn't ever seem to chime with what the Trump administration goes ahead and has and does.
No, absolutely. He sort of just seems to create chaos and false hope because he seems to be much with Rubio as well. Rubio is seen by the Ukrainians as someone who's much harder on Putin than Trump and Witkoff, who both are much softer, it seems to us, or to the Ukrainians from that side, or the Western side. So yes, and Keith Kellogg also came up with this idea a few weeks ago. He published an interview published in the Times, the London newspaper, talking about, having demilitarized zones in Ukraine and then having sort of Western troops. So basically proposing a sort of Berlin, West-East Germany sort of solution to the war.
Now, one of the reasons that Rubio says that he's not coming is simple. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, will not give up Crimea. That is correct, isn't it? Which was annexed in 2014 by the Russians. Zelensky, Ukraine, wants all of its territory back. And this is something that is this a sticking point that is absolutely intractable?
I think that what's happening here is that Ukraine is being asked to formally recognise Crimea and the territories that Russia has captured in the east and south of Ukraine as Russian. Now, how could you ask any country to recognise the territories that have been captured from it as belonging to the warring party? I mean, it sort of seems unrealistic. I think that there needs to be some sort of give and take. The Russians and the Americans have to understand what Ukraine has to be told what it is getting in return for this, because so far it seems they're being asked, and the Ukrainian sources who have seen the documents, the peace plan that Trump has put forward, they've said, well, it's very murky. What is Ukraine getting in return for giving up all these things? So Ukraine is being asked to take NATO off the table as well, which has happened in effect, obviously. The Americans, the Biden administration was the same. No one was saying that Ukraine could join NATO, but it's a very important symbolic thing to be able to show Russia. But that's being asked to take off the table. And, now Putin is saying, OK, I'll stop at the lines that we've gone. But as we saw just a week ago, just in the last few days in the Easter ceasefire, Putin doesn't stop firing when he said he has.
Let's move to a story which is connected, which is the fact that in the absence of America's support, or the threat of absence of America's support, other countries are now stepping up, including Japan.
Yes. So this is a story that's been circulating in Ukrainian media. This is Japan's Kyushu University Institute, that's sort of space pioneers. They're going to be launching some synthetic aperture radar satellites in 2026, and they're partnering up supposedly with Ukrainians to allow them to access the intelligence that they gather from these SAR satellites to help Ukraine with its intelligence gathering. Because we saw in February that the US switched off their intelligence gathering for Ukraine, that stopped the sharing. And this massively impacts, war efforts, because then Ukraine can't see when Russia is, for example, launching missile attacks on cities. That's huge for civilians. They don't get a prior warning of missile and drone attacks. Or they can't see troops that are massing, or they can't see preparations for, river crossings or potential land offensives. So this is very important news. Lots of different companies, partners have been trying to step up. There's the French company Eutelsat, but they have said they can't provide all of Ukraine's needs because they just don't have the capacity.
I'm staying with Ukraine, but into a more civilian realm, that aeroplanes could start to fly over the Ukrainian skies again, commercial aircraft.
Yes, so we've seen lots of interest interest in this from Wizz Air, Ryanair and other European airlines. But in the last 2 days, we've seen a civilian aircraft, the first civilian aircraft since the full-scale invasion began, circling over Lviv, going to the western cities of Ivano-Frankivsk and Rivne, just circulating in the sky. And it seems that this is sort of testing out the Lviv airport capacity. Can they accept aircraft now? Lviv is the airport that is most likely to open because it's just 2 or 3 minutes from the Polish border. So once the plane is taken off, it will be safely in NATO skies.
How important is this for Ukraine to re-establish this international connection?
It's vital, civilians coming back, being able to access their country freely right now, and diplomats, business leaders coming to and from Ukraine right now. You have to take a train from Warsaw or a Polish city and then spend basically 24 hours getting into Ukraine. So it adds a lot of stress onto a journey. Whereas, if you could make movement more fluid, then you would start to encourage more investment, trade, visits, tourism even.
The obvious danger, though, is that Russia is not going to stop targeting Lviv if the air traffic starts to resumes. If not, arguably, it might even increase its targeting of Lviv.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is only in the event of a ceasefire. This is only in the event of skies over Ukraine being peaceful and secure. It's one of the steps that, for example, could be floated in peace negotiations.
Let's move on to a story which is not connected to Ukraine. It is connecting to neighbouring Poland, and it is connected to infrastructure and to transport and to travel, and it's got to do with bees.
Yes. So Poland's, postal service, Poczta Polska, they've launched their first ever courier service for transporting bees across the country. So bees are huge, huge business in Poland. There's been a blossoming of beekeepers, aviaries, and Poland is now, I think one of the largest honey producers in the European Union. And so what you can do now is you can post a parcel with live bees inside. So I guess there will be this interchange.
Sorry, say that. We can send live bees in the post.
Live bees in the post. Well, the reason why I chose this story is because, my grandmother, Polish, lived in Poland after the Second World War, and she was sending herself sort of farm produce, even manure at one point in the postal service. So Polish people have this great tradition of, sending themselves or sending each other great produce in the post.
Our producer Hassan Anderson has just said something about sending bee mails. Julia Lassica, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. You are the Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now, it is far too easy for an older generation to criticise the young for being lazy, less committed, more entitled. After all, they never had it so good, etc., etc., etc. But a decline in soft skills is no good to anyone. So a programme here in the UK is aiming to ensure that the future workforce and indeed society grows up confident, productive and indeed employable. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Ramneek Ahluwalia, who's Chief Executive Higher Health in South Africa and the UK. And he joins me now on the line from Johannesburg. Very good morning to you, Ramneek.
Good morning, ma'am, and thank you to everyone, and such a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
Good. Let's enjoy this wonderful next few minutes when you tell us. You see, that's a wonderful example of soft skills. Politeness, warmth, generosity of spirit. So what's gone wrong for everyone else?
Studies over 100 years from Harvard, Stanford, everywhere across kept reminding us that when we do job success surveys with employers, with institutions, everybody says the results come out to be around 85% of every job success depends on soft skills. A very recent survey in UK itself pointed to close to 67% of employers asking for job success from soft skills. They are actually not soft skills. They are actually critical skills for living. skills that make you who you are. You're talking about empathy, emotional intelligence, conflict management, leadership, teamwork, time management, goal setting. These are very critical, essential soft skills, which we also call skills for living, that helps an individual to perform. And when you look around yourself, how the world is changing, how systems are changing, they become the essential tool for anyone, whether you are applying for a job, whether you're in studies, you perform better. So all results point out that an emphasis towards soft skills. So what all higher health has done is cracked one important element, how to teach soft skills. Everybody talks about the need of soft skills, but the young person needs to be taught soft skills. How do you make it interactive, peer-to-peer, so that they get it within themselves? And once they get it within themselves, and then the beauty of it is in their personal life and, of course, in their employable life.
And is it true that Generation Z, Gen Z, is struggling with soft skills? Or is this just an older generation wishing that they would stand up straight, not look at their phones and look you in the eye?
So, yes, that's a reality, because the world has changed. The digital transformation that has brought isolation among lots of people, living in a world without digital devices to a world which is only equipped with digital devices have changed a mindset, whole mental health, mental well-beings have changed, personalities have changed, groomings have changed, peer-to-peer systems have changed. And I think when these things go through a transformation, there are side effects. And one of the side effects is with growing population, growing demand, unemployment, things that we are seeing around it, we need people to be able to be resilient to face these challenges. And resilience is not taken into granted. Young people, late adolescents, coming into universities, coming into FE colleges, coming into high schools, trying to build a life, are too naive of a reality that comes ahead of them. They go through ginormous challenges in their minds, in their personal life, in the social challenges. And if we do not equip them, we do not train them, we do not develop them, we just need to build a future. And the future is the hope of a mother in the microeconomic perspective, and in the macroeconomic perspective, it's an economy of a country. And if these people are looked after, built with resilience, build those soft skills, they change the workspace, they change the system going forward.
Dr. Ramnik Ahluwalia, I'd better say thank you very much indeed for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, finally, let's head to Jakarta, where the time is just nudging 10 to 2 in the afternoon. The Chiefs is heading to Jakarta for its 4th edition, bringing together CEOs, founders, next-generation entrepreneurs and industry pioneers. We can expect sharp insights, dynamic discussions, the usual dazzling stuff from when the great Monocle Sarabang heads out into the world. Well, joining us now from Jakarta is Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief. Good afternoon, Fiona. How's it going?
Hi, Emma. I love the way you were selling the Chiefs there. It sounds very exciting. And it is. It's amazing to be here. I'm actually looking out from the 16th floor of a tower on this incredible scene, beautiful tropical greenery, swimming pool below me, and, the new Jakarta kind of blossoming in the distance. So it's very exciting.
And tell us exactly why you are in that particular location. This is the location for the Chiefs, isn't it?
Yeah, so we're in a new development, and we're in a new hotel, actually. The opening is on Friday night, 25 hours hotel. The conference is here. I think we wanted to be in Asia. We wanted to be in a place where people are kind of interested to do business from around the region. A lot of people from, I live in Tokyo, but people in Japan very interested in doing business in Indonesia. So it's a good place to gather, talk about, what's it like to manufacture here, or not just here, actually. We're keeping it pretty regional, but we've got visitors from all over the world, delegates coming from everywhere. So it's going to be an exciting gathering.
Indeed. And it kicks off with the traditional welcome cocktail in a few hours' time.
I mean, you'd expect nothing less, would you? I mean, yes, the cocktails will be flowing tonight, and then a dinner for speakers and editors. And then, we're starting 9 o'clock sharp tomorrow. And as always, Tyler likes to keep everything moving along at a pace. So it'll be exciting. So many good speakers. I'm going to be chatting to a couple of good people from Japan who are doing sustainable industries. We've got, skincare founders. We've got people in every kind of aspect, all different sectors. So, and obviously the Q&A at the end of each panel, which is always a good moment.
Indeed, right. So let's dig a little deeper on the panels that you're going to be moderating. Just talk us through who you've got and what we're going to be expecting from them.
Yeah, so one of the panels I'm doing, these two guys from Japan, Gen Fukushima, Ken Isono, both working in sustainability at very different angles on it. One is doing renewable energy, one is the biggest. He builds second homes for people. It's a sort of cooperative. You basically buy a few days every year. You have a second home without the responsibility of a second home. He's building. It's all regenerative, so that they do the hard work for you, the hard sustainable work. So we're really talking about how do you make a business sustainable but still make money.
So that's one, and the other one that we're doing as well.
Yeah, so I'm talking to Shanti Harmain, who's Indonesia's top film producer. So that should be, I can't wait for that. She's great. She's involved in so many productions, and it's a really, really interesting time for Indonesian film. It's growing massively, and the audience is just blooming here. So they're very, very happy with what's going on. So that's a very positive story. So that will be an interesting one as well.
The Chiefs sort of decamps to interesting different places each year. I mean, previous iterations have taken place in the likes of Dallas. When we are looking at somewhere like Indonesia, which is moving incredibly quickly on an internationally, what kind of different feeling or insights are we expected from to open up and offer to the rest of the world from this region?
Yeah, I think what you see is people are very open-minded here. They're really welcoming investment, and they also from here want to invest in other countries as well. And I think a lot of people are feeling, these are difficult times for trade. We don't want to go into the negatives too much. But I think a lot of people are thinking, we need to look at our regional neighbours, and these are good partners to do business with. So I think it's just a fresh perspective. We tend to look at everything, don't we, from Europe, America, from the West, and it's really good to come over this way and see there's a whole world going on of business that is coming from this angle. And it's already just chatting to people. We already had a dinner last night, you won't be surprised, Emma, and the conversations have already started, so they'll be continuing, I think, well into the night tomorrow night.
And these conversations, I mean, we began this programme talking about Asian finance ministers going to the IMF at a moment when the IMF has issued dire warnings about the prospect for growth, the prospect for tariffs. Is everybody where you are as beholden to this sort of following at sort of microcosmic level of whatever Donald Trump is doing next? Or is the region saying, hang on a minute, we have lots and lots to celebrate here, we're just going to get on with it ourselves?
I mean, look, obviously it impacts Asia massively. That some of the countries in this region were hit with absolutely huge tariffs. I actually spoke to one of the negotiators for Indonesia yesterday, who's just come back from Washington. And, they get it. It's a negotiation, and they know that it's going to come down, the tariff. What a lot of people here seem to be saying is we can't make business decisions based on, short-term policy changes in the White House. We need to think beyond that. So they're trying to hold their nerve. But I think also it's opening up opportunities with, in this side of the world, and maybe people are thinking other countries might be more reliable partners. But there's no question, it's going to impact business. And I think, Indonesia particularly is thinking, they're going to negotiate hard. They have been hit with hard tariffs, but they know they'll come down. So they're not completely negative, I must say. They're not too pessimistic.
Good. Finally, Fiona, a moment ago we were hearing from Dr. Ramneek Aluwalia, who is specialising in teaching the next generation soft skills. Your part of the world is really good at that, isn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, it's so interesting being here because we talk a lot about service in Japan, and service here is very different, but it's so wonderful to be here. I think hospitality is very natural here. Amazing array of restaurants, coffee shops. It's a bit of a secret, I think, Indonesia. Well, Jakarta, certainly. It's not on the tourist trail, Jakarta. But it's absolutely fantastic. So there's a whole world going on, and I think more people should be discovering it.
Fiona Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on the line online from Jakarta, and the Chiefs main conference starts tomorrow. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Chris Chermack and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.